Bill, W4, WR, Bob, K4HRK. We're going to talk about these things. Years ago, I started making these things after watching people try and sling padlocks on the end of a rope and throw them over a tree limb, busting knuckles. They have launchers on the end of poles where they shoot bean bags up in the trees. And I thought, okay, we got to do better than that. Otherwise, we're going to be here all day trying to put up antennas. So I started making these things, and several people got some, and they're laying around. Now, these things are legal in almost all 50 states. The only time they become illegal is when someone gets hurt. They can very easily be used and, like I said, get hurt. If not, if you don't pay attention to where you're pointing the thing and what's in it. There was a man injured. I was reading about him. Good old boys get together. They started making these things to shoot potatoes. Good old boys and good old girls get together and they do crazy things. And there was one man that was injured when one of his buddies shot him in the chest with a frog. Did cause injuries. People do crazy things, and sometimes you shouldn't hang around those kind of things. But anyway, these things can be dangerous if you don't pay attention to what you're doing. But they work very well for putting up antennas. The problem with this, it was discovered that when you go to crank this ball valve and fire this thing, that sometimes you pull it off your target. So, Bob here solved that problem. And I'll turn it over to him and let him go through and explain how he did that.
Well, thank you, Bill. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bob, K4HRK. Most of you know me. We're going to be talking about the evolution of pneumatic or compressed air antenna launchers. I don't know how many of you have launched these antennas, whatever, with the manual valves. It's a tricky thing. It's a big valve and it can be sticky, right? And you're turning this valve and you come off the manual. Okay. Now I was looking at some YouTube videos a while back, and they were launching potatoes, spud cannons, okay? And they were using a sprinkler valve. And I said, wow, this is interesting. We're using a water sprinkler valve with a 24-volt solenoid. And they had hacked the valve, if you will, and modified the valve to operate with compressed air. Okay? And I said, well, this is something we could probably adapt to antenna launcher and work really well. Okay? But with a twist, I said it would be really neat if we could like shoulder this like a rifle, if you will, and just pull a trigger. So that's what I came up with. Okay? I have a little cheat sheet here. Losing your aim. The valve. Let's talk about the valve for a little while, okay? Because that's the main ingredient. And let's see if I can find one. This is the valve, okay? A 24-volt solenoid operated water sprinkler valve. $18 or so, Amazon, Lowe's, whatever, okay? Solenoid, right? Now, obviously, you can operate this with a solenoid, but who wants to carry around a 24-volt power source if you're using compressed air anyways? To operate the gun, you might as well operate the valve the same way, okay? So you're pulling this guy out here, okay? Now that's the solenoid. We don't need this little needle valve in here either. It's just a bleeder valve, okay? In order to pack this, if you will, so that it works with antenna launchers, we need to fill this cavity here with epoxy, and this cavity here with epoxy, okay? And then we have to drill and tap for a 1/8 27 pipe tap, okay? We should say pipe nipple in there, whatever, because that's where the valve, that's where the so-called trigger will be. Okay, so I'm going to pass this around. Now, there's a diaphragm. There's a diaphragm and a spring. And as you're loading the accumulator with the compressed air, you're also lowering the bottom chamber here. Okay, and the diaphragm essentially is the valve. It applies the pressure, if you will, so that it shuts the valve, so the air from the accumulator cannot flow through the valve to the barrel. Okay, so I'm going to pass that around. Now, obviously, these are filled with epoxy. You need to take this apart and put a little masking tape on the back of those orifices, okay, in the back of the holes in there, because you don't want that epoxy to fall through there. Okay, but I'm going to pass that around, okay? And that's the valve, $18. Okay.
Does it matter what type of epoxy you use?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Okay, now any epoxy is good. Now I use this fiberglass resin, okay, and I would mix about a half an ounce, if you will, and then maybe use 5 or 6 drops of the hardener, okay. Fiberglass, but actually any epoxy is fine. Okay, now as you notice on there are 2 small holes, but I normally fill that larger cavity, if you will, probably with at least an 1/8 inch of epoxy. Pressures, PSI pressures, okay. Now the valve is capable of 135 PSI, okay. With the PVC Schedule 40, the 1 inch, about 450 PSI. On the 1 inch Schedule 40. 260 on the 3 inch. Those are the 2 diameters that we use. Okay. So we've had great luck with 25, 30 PSI. That's it. It will project with this bullet, if you will, I'll call it a bullet, well over 100 feet. You know, it's just that amount of pressure. So the pressure rating on the PVC is not an issue. Now, PVC, like anything else, you know, the joints would probably be the weak spot. But with the amount of pressure that we're using, it's not a big deal, right? And anything downstream of the valve doesn't have to be sealed all that well. Let's see. What I'm going to show you first, well, actually, our first version, it used a Harbor Freight air nozzle, okay? It was a straight down deal, if you will. And we were concerned with that because it hung down really far. And if it broke off, it could break the valve, whatever. You know, it was obtrusive. So let me just, again, on the PVC, you know, obviously the age of it, whatever, but hey, in our lifetimes, it's not going to matter. So for how much PSI that we're using, it's not a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to show you what we have, or what the version that I came up with originally. And now this has another kind of valve on it. We're going to talk about this valve in a little while. But what we were using originally was a Harbor Freight valve. Okay, it came down like this. Okay, and well, that was a little obtrusive, if you will. It was, you know, essentially it was easy to break off. So we wanted to change that. Now, Bill, you have the other design, right?
Right.
Why don't you show that
mention
design
something
right
real
now?
quick. We've had several different versions of projectiles. Yeah, we've had several different versions of projectiles. You can pretty much do anything you want, put weight in it, sand, lead, whatever the case may be. But we had, all these things have different aerodynamic characteristics. And one of the biggest problems I found is trying to find these things in the grass. It can be quite difficult. Even orange, we can lose these things.
Did you find the one from the antenna party?
No. But there's several kinds. Now, you can use different types of barrels. I mentioned safety. Man can be very inventive if he wants to cause harm to people, but we don't want to harm anybody. But you can go to a 1/2-inch pipe and shoot arrows out of this thing. We don't want to do anything like that. I hope there's no one in here with that kind of mind except me. Bob here.
Have we tested?
We just know it will. Bob has come up with a smaller barrel, so he has to make a smaller round for his. But they're weighted. Otherwise, they go up in the tree and don't want to come back.
Yeah, there is, obviously, there's a compromise, right? The lighter projectiles are going to go higher, right? But the heavier ones, if you don't need the height, the heavier ones are probably the way to go because they don't get stuck in the tree as much. They have a gravity assist in coming down, and that's a good deal, right? You know, so it's a compromise, but I mean, it's an easy compromise because you can make them any way you want. Now, on the barrel that I use, I use the 1-inch barrel. It's right here, okay? And what I just used was, I think this is a piece of 3/4 PVC with the caps, whatever. Now, I did have to sand down. I did have to sand these down, whatever. Now, if you have got a little machine shop, you know, I did this on a lathe, whatever, but you can do it on a belt sander, whatever, and get it down. And it doesn't have to be perfect because you can use wadding. If you want to use wadding in here, it's not an issue. And that will take up any space. Okay? So, why don't you show the folks the second version?
Okay.
Okay.
Bob's version here was actually published in CQ magazine. I don't believe it was
March. Oh, I'm sorry. September?
Yeah, I think it was September.
Okay.
September CQ magazine. His launcher was in it. I see you've changed that.
And I haven't got any nasty emails yet.
There you go.
That's a good thing.
Did you get paid for that?
CQ magazine has its issues right now. So they don't pay their, writers that much right now.
Anyway, I got with Bob and I said, hey, I like that. I want me one of those. So he told me what I needed and I picked it all up. And we discussed several different options. And this is what we finally came up with.
So we've got this is the right angle now, okay? This is the right angle, and we made a trigger guard, or a guard for it, if you will. So that's going to be rough and tumble.
Well, see, you get that to an airport.
And we got a special military sight on it, too.
Right, so you can take that thing and lay it down.
Yeah.
And sight to the side of it. And works very well.
How accurate is it?
Well,
I know
the thing
you've
is,
tried it several times.
You've got the sight here, you can sight the end of the barrel and the tops of the trees wherever you want to shoot this thing.
The barrel's not rifled, so it's kind of like a shotgun.
Right, and Bob mentioned wadding. Any black powder enthusiasts? Or have any black powder enthusiasts? You put a patch in it, drop the round down in there, and then it forces it up through there. So that works out pretty well. We tried that even.
Yeah, and that worked really well.
That worked really well.
That really worked.
The bigger rounds, there's a little play in there. But that helps.
Well, the wadding compensates for that.
Right.
You know.
Anyway,
What do you use for wadding?
Just
anything,
anything,
kind of
rag,
cotton t-shirt,
a piece of cotton, yeah, really anything.
piece of a sheet,
Yeah.
anything to wad down in there and hold pressure.
Yeah.
Right, we're not using gunpowder, so we don't have to worry about being burned. you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
Oh, hey,
Nathaniel.
Hey, Cliff. Yeah, sorry we're not talking here and facing you. Apologize for that.
What's about Nathaniel? I ain't seen him.
Hey,
Heard him in a
let's
while.
see. Okay, that is the second
Yeah,
version.
well, I'm glad I could join you and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay,
Glad you joined us.
great to have you here. Good to have you here. Okay, now, another feature, obviously, is this can be broken down into a smaller section, if you will, okay? So my next project, I haven't really started on it yet. We've all heard of the Saturday night special. I'm gonna try to come up with a Saturday morning special. That'll be smaller, if you will, you know?
Sawed-off potato gun.
Carbine model.
Ongoing, fits in the case maker.
Ongoing project, okay. Now, version 3. Okay, first of all, let me mention this. We normally go with a Zebco 404 or whatever. Relatively inexpensive, $15, Amazon. Works really well. I definitely prefer the enclosed cases. You know, I've tried the spinning reels and it just goes all over the place, you know?
Line gets
Right, it
twisted.
just unwinds, it just goes all over the place. And these work pretty good. Line weight, probably 20 pounds is fine, you know? Obviously the smaller diameter line, you can put more on there, right? You know, and so it's all compromised with it. But that's a big feature is you can take it apart, easy to transport. Now the final version here, and we'll talk about the valves. I'm sorry.
Paranoid about barrels.
Is, you know, I found a few miniature valves, if you will, that are very, how would I put it, they're not obtrusive at all. They're just very close in here, whatever, you get just a button valve. Now, I have a tendency to go overboard on stuff, so I have a little safety in there, okay? But there's just, this little valve just boom like this, and that's it. It's as simple as that. It just fires like that rather than this manual valve stuff. Just hitting that. Now this valve is more expensive. This is about $30 on Amazon, whatever. But it's close in. Now I came up with this other valve that I found. Now this one is $11 on Amazon. I mentioned Amazon because that's the only way I can find this thing
I like how y'all disguise y'all's weapons in boxes to bring them into the restaurant.
We consult with the manager first.
Okay.
That way,
Yeah.
wouldn't scare him or the customer.
I'll pass this around too. You know, again, I go overboard on things, okay?
People
Um,
hold their head and think we're
okay, I got a
terrorists.
safety on this one, okay? You pull that up and boom, that's it. It's just like a switch. Okay? So that would be mounted, I got to point this at you. That would be mounted in like this, okay? About like that. And you open that thing up and the switch. I'm gonna pass that around, okay? Okay, let's see. Now, the cost on this, without the Zebco reel and without the miniature valves, about $70, okay? Obviously, if you buy this stuff in bulk, the longer pieces, and that's what I want to discuss with you in just a moment here. I will put the parts list on our email soon, Okay, I'll do that and get that out there. If there's enough interest, we had a very successful antenna build part. That went well, you know, and if there's enough interest, I'd like to do a antenna launcher build part. Okay, I'd be willing to hack the valves, okay? Or modify the valves, so I don't have to do that. And buy all the supplies, if you will. You know, if we could all just ship in, whoever wanted, whatever, we can set something up in a park and do it very much like the successful antenna build. Let me see, is there anything else we need to discuss here?
Yeah, I wanted to mention real quick, if everybody or more people wanted to get involved in building these things, we could actually turn this into more fun by going out to a park, maybe at the club picnic, putting hula hoops out on the hills and shooting. Everybody competing to see who can hit the most hula hoops or whatever. Just a thought.
That could possibly be a good fundraiser for the club too. Build them, put online for sale.
No, I don't know about that.
Maybe.
Even though they're not illegal, we might run into some problems like that.
Might get the wrong idea, using it the wrong way.
True. That's true.
If somebody were to get hurt, they say, well, Murray Amateur Radio Club taught us how to do this.
Bob, you gonna make a mortar version, double barrel?
You know, how far we want to go with this? I don't know.
Actually, I can see a mortar version being kind of
I
interesting,
would
easier to aim at.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess that's about it. I have one for this. Okay, let me just see. Yeah, as I say, the valves are available. The smaller valves are available here, you know, Amazon and the,
What are those valves? What's that actually for? What would you,
well, okay, this obviously, okay, well,
or the one we passed around? What would,
let me use, okay, this is the main valve. This is the valve that allows the compressed air and the accumulator to move through the valve to project the projectile, okay? That's the main valve.
Right.
Now this other valve that we've got here, the nozzle deal,
right?
this releases the diaphragm that is that keeps this valve closed and locked, so the air in the accumulator can't pass through. Then there's a diaphragm there, but when you release the pressure below that diaphragm, then the diaphragm opens, the valve opens. The rest is history. Okay, but that's the deal. So you have the primary valve, and then you have the secondary valve. Okay. And but this is the way to go. It really is, rather than the big manual valve. And, relatively inexpensive. You know, the hacking part, you know, the epoxy and the hole, but yeah, I've got a little machine shop, and I'm willing to do that. Okay? So if anyone wants to build one of these.
Instead of epoxy, can you use just a plug?
I beg your pardon?
Could you use a plug instead of epoxy?
You know, I don't think so. Well, it depends on, you know, on the PSI pressure or whatever. I guess you could. You know, I guess you could, but you want to plug it on the pressure side, okay, on the other side of this, and not on the top side. You want to plug it on the inside. I guess that would work, but I'm thinking epoxy is really easy to use. You know, it really is. You just put a little bit of masking tape on the back of the holes, and you put your epoxy in there, and it's done. I mean, it's a piece of cake. You know, and as I say, I'd be willing to do that part. So, let me ask you, is there any interest in building these?
I might have already ordered butter circular valve and air gun after I saw his.
Okay. Yeah. Because, you know, some we can talk about, okay? I guess that's the presentation, right, Bill?
I guess that's it.
That question real quick. You mentioned about 25, 30 PSI roughly.
Yeah, that's all you really need.
With your run-of-the-mill portable air compressor, how long would it take to get that tank to pressure?
It depends on the size of the accumulator, right? Now, that's another thing we can talk about. Now, I built this one with the accumulator. I was going to combing here, to suit me. Now, obviously, if you're a bigger guy, then you could have a longer accumulator, right, whatever. But this size, it wouldn't take long at all. Yeah. I'm thinking of a minute.
Say even with a bicycle pump, you can probably
Right, you can even use a bicycle.
18.
Right, exactly.
18
Pumping about
pumps.
18 times with a regular bicycle pump.
Yeah.
That's enough.
I think you stopped me after about 16.
Yeah, 18's enough.
Yeah.
Bob, are you using a little pressure gauge of some sort on it?
I've got a pressure gauge on my inflator. Okay, so that gives me the indication.
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay. Now, the other thing I did not mention is we do have to buy the valve stems, if you will, okay? But you can get these at any auto parts store, O'Reilly's, Advance, whatever. They're not that expensive. And this is probably the best place to put it. I think in retrospect, I would put it on the other side.
It's just a standard Schrader valve, right?
Beg pardon?
That's just a standard Schrader valve.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very, they're just available everywhere. Now, obviously, when you get this in, and you want to make sure it's right and sealed properly, because once you've got all the PVC in place, that's in there. You're not going to be able to get it out again. Okay? So you want to make sure that you've got a good seal on this. The other additional part, obviously, is you need the adhesive. Okay, but I mean, if you launch antennas, even on a temporary basis, if you will, this is a nice way to.
I think the next generation, you probably need to have a hand pump on it, just to crank.
Yeah.
They sell small rechargeable bike pumps that aren't that big, and I'm probably gonna order one. And,
Yeah, you can actually get
and I was just
small,
thinking,
like
you could get a small little bike pump and
battery
strap it to
operated
the
that's
side
like this
of
big
it.
around, like this long.
That way it just auto charges.
Now, he mentioned the life expectancy. Polyvinyl chloride breaks down in sunlight. So it's best if you have one of these to store it in the dark somewhere.
Probably worth it. Some spray paint.
Make it last longer. Yeah, you could probably spray it.
You know where this is ultimately headed.
Yeah.
We're gonna have the Ham Olympics.
Yeah.
And everybody's gonna have a stopwatch on them, right? And the fastest you can get your antenna hung and make your first contact, that's your time, right?
Get one you can wear on your hip.
Well, that's the Saturday morning special.